Hey, Alan barked, already halfway through a smug chuckle. This meeting's invite only. You don't belong in here. I froze with my hand still on the glass door handle, one boot inside the strategy room, the other still on that godforsaken hallway carpet that smells like toner and corporate dreams dying. 12 suited heads turned in unison, consultants, VPs, a couple board observers. All men. All staring like I'd just wandered into a men's locker room with a clipboard. I swallowed hard, forced a smile. Just wanted to make sure the latest integration reports made it to. They did, he cut me off, waving his hand like I was a mosquito in a Zoom call. We've got it handled. That was code for, I'm stealing your work and repackaging it with buzzwords you'd never use in real life. I knew the game. Alan loved tossing around phrases like cross-functional synergy and actionable intelligence. Like tech jargon was confetti and he was the ringmaster of some overpriced circus. I turned on my heel and walked out, calm on the outside. But inside? Inside I was shoving a blowtorch into a powder keg and lighting a match with my teeth. Because I had belonged in that room. I had built the back-end engine that drove the entire analytics suite Alan was about to present to that fancy consulting team from Redwood Capital. I was the one who'd stayed up nights mapping out that predictive churn model with the weighted regression logic that got us a 23% client retention spike. But Alan? Alan was the guy who once asked me if data lake was an actual body of water. If you're already gritting your teeth at this, you're not alone. And hey, 97% of people who listen to these stories never hit subscribe. If you want to hear how this one ends, and trust me, it gets good, tap that like, hit subscribe, and keep going. It really helps the team keep sharing these wild true stories. I didn't argue with him that day. Didn't pitch a fit. Didn't forward the invite email with my name clearly on the attendee list. Because I'd seen this movie before. Different office, different city, same damn script. Alan had been slowly ghosting me from the narrative for months. First, he took over weekly client update calls. You're too technical, he said. They need vision, not versions. Then he began rewriting my Jira tickets before sending them upstream, stripping out details, sprinkling in words like transformative and industry disrupting. Suddenly, things I'd architected from scratch were being described in investor decks as Alan's innovations. The man couldn't debug his way out of a paper bag, but he knew how to hold a whiteboard marker and smile like he invented breathing. I wasn't surprised when I noticed my name missing from the core contributors slide in his last pitch, or when he introduced me to a new dev hire as support staff. The pattern was clear. Erase me slow enough that by the time I was gone, no one would remember what I'd built. But Alan was playing checkers, and I was already halfway through a chess endgame he didn't even know had started. Because the architecture he was selling? The engine he was parading around in meetings like some prize poodle? That wasn't a demo. That was my code. And inside it were a few digital handshakes he didn't know about. Metadata tags. Ownership logs. Version controls. Quiet little fingerprints in the machine. Not to mention the claws. Oh, the claws. But we'll get to that. For now, I walked away from that glass room with its mahogany table and overpriced fruit tray. Let him have his little show. Let him talk about vision and scalability to a bunch of consultants who didn't know he once Googled how to merge a Git branch. Because while Alan was in there fluffing his feathers, I was getting to work. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just precisely. Let him bask in his moment. He was building his kingdom on sand. And I was the tide. It started with a catered lunch, which in our office meant something was either very good or very, very bad. Alan strutted in with his sleeves rolled to his elbows like he'd just closed a deal in a Martin Scorsese movie. Exciting times ahead, he declared over a spread of lukewarm sushi and sugar-caked croissants. Big moves. Real big. People clapped. Someone whistled. I sipped my coffee like it was whiskey and waited for the other shoe to land. By that Friday, the whispers were everywhere. Redwood Capital's in talks. 480 mil all cash. They're scaling into predictive SaaS. One of the sales guys claimed Alan was already designing a new org chart on a whiteboard in his office, putting himself at the top with a title that sounded like it was pulled from a Marvel movie. Chief Innovation Commander, or some nonsense like that. That Monday, I saw the first draft of the investor pitch deck on the communal printer. Left face up, like a trap or a confession. I flipped through it like a dissection. Page 12 hit me in the throat. A full-page photo of Alan with a smirk, pointing at a screen. The caption: Director Alan presents his revolutionary modular analytics framework to early investors. My name was nowhere. My code was everywhere. That was the moment it stopped being infuriating and became strategic. See, before that day, I thought maybe I'd misjudged him. Maybe he was just clueless, a classic middle manager drowning in buzzwords and ego. But now I realized he was deliberate, calculated, a scavenger dressed as a visionary. He wasn't just stealing credit. He was trying to sell a product he couldn't even explain past slide 3. And worse, he was playing with legal fire without knowing he was already standing on gasoline. Because Alan didn't know about the rider clause in the original master service agreement. Buried deep in the supplemental section, back when our company was smaller and I had the leverage to write it in, was a trigger clause. In the event of sale, acquisition, or merger, ownership of the proprietary stack would revert to co-signers unless otherwise negotiated. Co-signers meaning me. My initials were on every page. Vet Inc. Countersigned by legal. Before Alan ever showed up with his shiny watch and TED Talk energy, that clause was baked in and sealed. I didn't rush. I didn't wave flags. I just quietly requested a copy of the original MSA from our old legal admin under the pretense of documentation continuity. She emailed it that afternoon with a smiley face. Then I started organizing. Every commit log with my name. Every timestamp from our Git repo showing when the core architecture modules were designed and deployed. I exported branch histories, ownership chains, user actions, backed it all up twice and mailed hard copies to myself, sealed and timestamped. The post office guy joked I was suing someone. I just smiled and said, "Not yet." Meanwhile, Alan was parading through departments like a touring magician. "This framework will change the game," he'd say. "Built it from the ground up." Once, I heard him say he developed the predictive engine over a long weekend of deep flow. I almost choked on my LaCroix. This man once asked me if JSON was a new intern. I began collecting emails too. Anywhere he referenced ownership, anything vague enough to look damning when paired with real evidence. I kept it all in a folder titled Windshear. No one but me knew what it meant. Just a reminder. The more you rise on fake wings, the harder the collapse when the wind shifts. I didn't tell HR. I didn't confide in friends. Hell, I didn't even tell my sister, and she's a defense attorney who lives for this kind of drama. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about architecture. You don't build a cathedral and let someone else slap their name on the cornerstone. Alan thought the merger would make him immortal. That Redwood would buy his vision and crown him a thought leader in some glossy business magazine. What he didn't realize was this. He was selling a house without holding the deed. And I'd kept every damn receipt. "Listen," Alan said, dropping his voice like we were planning a heist. "Redwood's team is very image conscious. Clean lines, polished narratives. Too many cooks in the kitchen. It muddies the message. It's better if I lead client-facing meetings from here on out. Optics, you know?" I knew. He said it with that practiced smile. That MBA issue tone like he was doing me a favor by making me invisible. I just nodded and muttered something about focusing on the architecture. He grinned like he'd just solved world peace. From that day on, my invites stopped showing up. I was scrubbed from the demo calendar. Optional tags on Slack threads. CCs became BCCs. One of the interns, a well-meaning kid fresh out of Stanford, asked me if I was still part of the team. I told him I was the part nobody talked about. The backbone you don't see until it breaks. But that was fine. I didn't need to be in the room. I was the room. Every slide Alan presented, every KPI he bragged about, every forecast projection that made Redwood's analysts nod along, that was me. My models. My stack. My code. And now it was time to salt the earth. I started with the license keys. Tucked away in the deployment layer were trigger scripts that pinged a private server I controlled. It was perfectly legal, written into the original licensing agreements. If someone tried to fork the system without authorization, the logs would show it, and I'd have proof. Then I moved to metadata. Every module I'd built got a silent update. Embedded ownership tags in the header comments. Invisible to the front end but fully searchable by any due diligence crawler worth its salt. Version control timestamps cross-reference with employee IDs. Commit hashes chained directly to my personal repo forked 6 years ago. You couldn't untangle this system from me without tearing the whole engine apart. And for good measure, I left behind Easter eggs, lines of code that looked like optimization functions, but when opened, displayed a benign but pointed message. Engineered by my name. Under MSA protections, Section 14.7. No drama. No threats. Just a breadcrumb trail leading to one inevitable conclusion. This system wasn't Alan's to sell. I didn't stop at code. I pulled old emails, screenshots of whiteboard sessions with timestamps, photos of early UI drafts scrawled in my handwriting on a stack of napkins from when the company couldn't afford proper wireframing tools. I cataloged everything. Created a private wiki. Built an offline archive on an encrypted SSD I kept in my coat pocket like a holy relic. Alan, meanwhile, strutted through the halls like a prom king. Told HR he was stepping up to a visionary role. Started dropping terms like synergistic data funnels and vertical disruption. I heard he ordered business cards with a new title, Chief Platform Strategist. No one asked where the strategy actually lived. He didn't even notice I was no longer fighting him. That I stopped correcting him in meetings. That I no longer offered context when he fumbled through a technical Q&A. He thought I was fading. What I was really doing was setting the stage. Every piece he touched, every demo he clicked, every deck he presented, it was all laced with threads that tied back to me, like a spiderweb spun from court exhibits. He was walking into a trap so quiet, so gentle he'd never hear the door close behind him. He thought absence was surrender. But sometimes absence is the setup. The first demo with Redwood was scheduled for a Wednesday, 10 a.m. sharp. Alan showed up wearing a suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment's annual rent, and smiled like he'd been chosen by God to bring data to the masses. I watched from the overflow room. Wasn't invited, obviously, but a friendly dev left the Zoom link open and accidentally connected it to a spare monitor behind me. Purely for documentation review. Of course. Alan kicked things off with his usual parade of polished bullshit. Slides full of upward trending arrows, words like frictionless integration, and enough acronym soup to drown a consultant. The Redwood team nodded politely, but you could see the lead analyst's jaw tighten each time Alan skipped past a data model with the elegance of someone hiding a bad poker hand. Then came the live demo. Alan toggled into the dashboard, clicking like he was navigating a maze he'd never walked through sober. At one point, he hovered over the cohort retention breakdown for nearly 10 seconds, clearly waiting for a tooltip to explain what the hell it meant. Now here, he said, voice slightly higher, you can see how we engineered this predictive insight layer, using, some of our proprietary ranking algorithms. One of Redwood's team, a sharp woman with tortoiseshell glasses and a spreadsheet tattoo on her forearm, I swear to God, tilted her head and asked calmly, what's the weighting function behind those rankings? Alan blinked. Twice. Swallowed. Well, that depends on the dataset. Legacy documentation wasn't always consistent, but we've streamlined it. Shouldn't be an issue. Another voice. Which part of the stack handles segmentation logic? And are those clusters fixed or dynamic? Alan's smile twitched. So, great question. Our junior engineering team has been iterating on that. I'll loop in someone who can speak to the deeper tech underpinnings. Loop in. That meant panic. That meant stall. He signaled to Greg, one of the junior devs who was still green enough to ask permission to go to lunch. Greg shuffled into view, wide-eyed, clutching a laptop like a bulletproof vest. Yeah, Greg stammered, voice cracking. So that clustering logic is built off of the core function that was inherited from the earlier architecture. Earlier? One of the Redwood guys asked. You mean the original build? Greg nodded too quickly. Yeah, I think so. That would have been engineered by, he trailed off, glancing toward the hallway, where my reflection flickered in the glass. The air in that conference room shifted. You could feel it, even from 100 feet away behind a muted speakerphone. A third buyer leaned into his colleague and whispered, who actually built this? Alan kept smiling. But it was hollow now. Tight. Like someone holding a plank over a chasm and praying no one notices the nails are missing. They wrapped early. Said they'd circle back internally. Alan blamed a VPN hiccup and unexpected latency, but no one was buying it. These were seasoned acquisition sharks. They didn't care about flair, they cared about foundation. And what they saw today was duct tape, confusion, and a man selling blueprints to a house he didn't build. That night, Alan sent out an all-hands message. Great progress today. Proud of everyone. Let's tighten the messaging for next week. Tighten the messaging. Not fix the product. Not review the architecture. Tighten the messaging. I saved the email. Put it in the Windshare folder. Because now the buyers were asking questions. And soon they'd want answers. It was subtle at first. Just a harmless-looking email that slipped into the company's legal inbox late on a Thursday evening. Subject line. IP ownership confirmation, preliminary. Sent from one of Redwood's senior legal analysts. No red flags. No alarm bells. Just 10 polite words that detonated like C for once someone actually read them. Please confirm full ownership details and licensing structure for core analytics system stack. Per MSA clause reference if applicable. I was in the dev pit when legal started pacing. First it was Raj from contracts. Then 2 more from compliance joined him in a whisper huddle near the kitchenette. You could see it on their faces. Those 3 stages of corporate panic. Confusion, dawning horror, then the frantic search for a fall guy. By 3:15 p.m., I got the Slack ping. Raj K, legal hey quick Q. Do you remember if you ever signed anything around IP when you built the first system? I smiled so hard my molars ached. I typed back casually. Should be in the original MSA. Check section 14.7 and writer B. Happy to resend if you need my copy. 2 minutes later, the office printer came to life. I watched through the glass as Raj sprinted over like it was spitting out a live grenade. He tore off the last page like it might vanish if he blinked. Because there it was. My name. My signature. In black and white. Countersigned by our then CEO and stamped by our former general counsel. A legally binding writer. Quietly drafted, thoroughly vetted, and promptly forgotten by everyone, except me. The clause wasn't dramatic. Just surgical. It stated that in the event of third-party acquisition, merger, or material transfer of platform ownership, all proprietary code modules developed prior to FI3 remained co-owned by the original engineer of record. Me. Unless renegotiated in writing and compensated at fair market value. I'd written it myself during the third reorg, back when the company was still running on IKEA chairs and brute force optimism. It was a hedge. A guardrail. I'd seen too many startups eat their own. And I never forgot how fast you can go from core architect to technical obstacle, the minute someone wants to reshape the narrative. Alan had no idea it existed. He hadn't even joined the company until a year later. Now, that clause was a live wire wrapped around his entire sales pitch. By 4 p.m., our internal legal team had gone full DEFCON 2. The chief legal officer was on the phone with Redwood's counsel, speaking in a tone I hadn't heard since we botched a licensing deal with that Canadian telecom giant. The board had been looped in. So had finance. Someone said the word material breach, under their breath like it was a curse. Meanwhile, I stayed put. Quiet. Still invisible to most. Just a background presence with noise-canceling headphones and a terminal window open. But now I wasn't just a developer. I was a stakeholder. They couldn't scrub my name anymore. Couldn't sell what they didn't fully own. Redwood wouldn't risk that kind of exposure. No buyer would. You don't throw nearly $500 million at a platform with an IP landmine at the center. Alan? He was still clueless. Hadn't checked his email. Probably still polishing his talking points for next week's follow-up demo. Meanwhile, the foundation under him was turning to wet cement. Vindication didn't come as a standing ovation. It didn't arrive with champagne or applause. It came as silence. Stiff backs in conference rooms. Legal emails marked high priority. Phone calls that started with sighs and ended with, "We'll have to rework the deck." For the first time in months, they couldn't ignore me. Even if they never said my name. Because my signature was already there. Right where it needed to be. They booked the big room for the final pitch. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the fake ferns no one watered, where sunlight hits just right so the board photos on the wall look like they're watching you. Every exec was present, even the ones who hadn't stepped out of their private offices in months. Alan wore a new suit, charcoal gray, tailored within an inch of its polyester sole. You could smell the cologne from the hallway, some knockoff brand meant to scream power and whisper desperation. The Redwood acquisition team filed in like a tribunal, calm, clinical, notepad ready. No smiles this time. The lead guy, Chambers, looked like he hadn't blinked since the Clinton administration. They sat. Alan stood. He launched into the pitch like a man auditioning for a part he already thought he'd landed. Slides up, jargon flying, teeth shining. What we've built here, he said, hands clasped in mock reverence, is more than a product. It's a platform. A vision. A leap forward in predictive intelligence. He clicked through interface mockups I designed, quoted KPIs I extracted from regression models I wrote, dropped terms like decay curve modulation and forecast fidelity, which, ironically, he'd asked me to explain to him less than a month ago. 20 minutes in, Chambers raised a hand. Flat, firm. Like a blade. Alan paused mid-sentence. Yes, of course. Chambers didn't blink. Where's the actual creator? 5 words. No emotion. No elaboration. Just a scalpel to the jugular. The room froze. Alan blinked. Swallowed. Smiled. Well, I led the team, obviously, but this was very much a collective effort. We believe in shared innovation. Chambers tilted his head, like he was inspecting a forgery. You didn't answer the question. Alan's jaw twitched. You could feel the tension ripple down the conference table like a bad weather front. Eyes darted around the room. Legal, ops, engineering. Everyone scanning each other like someone might know what to say. Then slowly, as if the air itself had turned him, Chambers looked past Alan. Past the rows of directors. Past the senior engineers trying to merge into their seats. He looked at me. The woman sitting in the back. No badge. No chair at the table. Just a folding seat against the wall, hands folded in her lap like a courtroom stenographer. Watching. Waiting. Someone from our side cleared their throat. That's her. The original architect. I didn't stand right away. I let it hang for a moment. Let the silence stretch until it hummed in the walls. Then I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked to the front of the room like I'd built the floor beneath it, because in a way I had. Chambers didn't offer a chair. He just nodded once, then asked the first question. It wasn't soft. What mechanism determines real-time anomaly thresholds when sample sizes drop below statistical significance? Alan squirmed in the corner. I answered calmly, directly. Cited the fallback algorithm. Referenced the confidence recalibration module we'd built after the Q2 incident. The one Alan called unnecessary back-end noise. Chambers asked for more. I answered all of them. And in that 5-minute exchange, the story rewrote itself. Every dismissal, every deleted email, every time Alan told me, optics matter more than input. Every time I was cut from a meeting, sidelined from a pitch, erased from a slide deck, all of it dissolved. No one clapped. No one dared. But the energy shifted. You could feel it. Because now they knew. The real architect wasn't the man in the $1,000 suit. It was the woman who hadn't been invited, yet stood there like the room was hers. Chambers didn't ease up after that. He leaned in, pen tapping, brow furrowed, tone sharp like a surgeon testing for nerve damage. Explain your model's rationale for using multinomial logistic regression over tree-based classifiers for churn prediction. Context-aware variable prioritization. Too much variance in user patterns to trust a one-size-fits-all split. Logistic keeps the coefficients interpretable and stable over time. I replied without blinking. Your anomaly detection. What governs its override threshold? 3-tiered trigger system. System baseline, behavior delta, and recent patch impact. If all 3 trip inside a 48-hour window, the override halts non-critical suggestions. He nodded, scribbled something, then asked a question so deep in the architecture I half wondered if it was a trap. What happens if the fallback environment loses connectivity mid-sample? The system defaults to a rolling median with error correction. Predictive accuracy drops 3% max, but continuity holds. Logs the drop in case of recurring incidents. There was a pause. Just half a second. But enough for everyone to hear the click when Chambers' pen finally stopped tapping. He looked up, calm measured. This, he said, gesturing, not to Alan, not to the screen, but to me, is who we're acquiring. Not a brand. A mind. That sentence hit the air like a gunshot in a cathedral. Alan stood there frozen, still half smiling, like he hadn't fully processed what just happened. You could see the denial forming behind his eyes. He took a step forward, clearing his throat with that phony tone he used in staff meetings. Of course, he said quickly. We've always worked collaboratively. She's been part of the dev team since early on, very talented. A great supporting architect. He looked right at me, waiting for me to nod, waiting for me to play the game. Shrink back into the corner like a good little ghost in the machine. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Chambers didn't even look at him. He turned to the Redwood team and said, "We'll need her in all future technical reviews. And let's update our acquisition draft. She'll need to be listed in the IP transition and integration planning documents." Our CFO, who hadn't spoken all day, sat back in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Two board members started whispering. I caught snippets. Restructure, integration oversight, compensation realignment. Alan opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. He looked smaller now, his perfect posture sagging under the weight of irrelevance. He didn't realize it yet, but the reorg had already begun, just not the one he envisioned. I could feel it, even as they tried to keep it quiet. Side chats in Slack, HR notes being updated mid-meeting, the beginning of a shuffle that would end with Alan outside the circle he once ruled. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just answered Chambers' last question, about system load balancing under duress, with the same clarity I'd given since day one. Because this wasn't a power grab. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. And Alan? He was finally falling. The memo came out late Sunday night, timed like all corporate executions. Quietly, cleanly, just early enough for Monday's inboxes, but late enough to avoid weekend confrontation. It was 3 sentences long. Clinical. Cold. Effective immediately, Director Allen will be stepping away from all merger-related responsibilities to focus on internal systems realignment. The integration team will now report to my name, effective EOD. Please update all stakeholder workflows accordingly. No explanation. No ceremony. Just a deletion, like dragging an old file to the trash. By Monday morning, his access was restricted. The deal's Slack channels locked. Shared docs read-only. His name, which had been plastered across every early draft of the transition plan, quietly vanished. Even the patent appendix, once bloated with his exaggerated contributions, was slimmed down to one name. Mine. I didn't ask for it. Didn't lobby. I never so much as hinted. But Redwood had seen enough. They weren't buying swagger. They weren't buying Alan's smirk or his keynote fantasies, or that fake quote he'd inserted in the company blog about reshaping the future of data, one insight at a time. They were buying certainty. So the title came without negotiation. Chief Integration Officer. They needed someone who could actually steer the architecture across 2 platforms. Someone who understood not just what the system did, but what it meant. And that someone had spent 3 years being told to stay out of the room. Now, I was the room. They sent over the final signature page late Tuesday, real paper, printed in duplicate, delivered in a navy leather folder with silver trim. The Redwood CEO was already in the main conference room, flanked by his deputies and 2 of our board members. I was the last one to walk in. No folding chair this time. No back row. No Alan standing at the front pretending to lead a system he didn't understand. Just me, calm, composed, greeted with a nod and a chair already pulled out. They passed the document across the table. The Redwood CEO signed first, his pen moving without hesitation. Then came legal. Then the board, then finance. Then silence. They looked at me. My pen didn't shake. My name fit perfectly across the line, clean, even unmistakable. Chief Integration Officer. I set the pen down. The CEO smiled and extended his hand. Glad we've got the right architect for the job. No fireworks. No round of applause. Just a room full of powerful people acknowledging, finally, what had been true all along. Alan wasn't in the building. No one mentioned him. No one needed to. His absence had become the closing statement. I stood, gathered the signed folder, and walked out with the same pace I always had. Unrushed, steady, silent. But now every footstep felt like it echoed just a little louder. Because I didn't claw my way in. I simply waited until the floor shifted. And when it did, I was the only one who hadn't built my story on a lie. The chairs were new, but the table was the same, long, polished, intimidating. The conference room had been remodeled with glass partitions and touchscreen walls, but the bones hadn't changed. Still overlooked the skyline. Still caught the late afternoon sun, just right to give everyone a golden hour glow. This time, I was early. Not because I needed to prove anything. Because I belonged there now. I laid my tablet on the table, pulled out the new integration roadmap, and flipped through the last round of system performance reports. The Redwood merger had closed cleanly. Our infrastructure handled the scale. The churn rate dropped. The projection models outpaced forecast. My roadmap was the backbone of both platforms now. Tight, resilient, battle-tested. The door opened behind me. A new face stepped in, junior strategy lead from Redwood, maybe mid-20s, still learning which buzzwords mattered and which ones were landmines. He froze for half a second, then nodded with a mix of awe and apology. You're the architect, right? I looked up. Just nodded. He didn't sit until I did. The others trickled in, some old, some new. Nobody rushed to lead. Nobody tried to explain the system to me. No one dared talk over me when I spoke. The new CTO ran his update past me before the meeting started. Legal deferred to me on the data transfer clause. Marketing asked for permission to cite features I'd built from scratch. My name didn't have to be on every slide. It was in every line of code. We got through the session in under an hour. No noise. No ego. Just clarity. Purpose. Afterward, someone asked if I'd be attending the next Joint Innovation Summit. They're requesting you specifically, he said. Said they want the architect in the room. I smiled, faint but real. No more Alan. No more optics. No more being told to step out for politics or polish or some bloated, fabricated narrative. This was different. Because now when I walked into the room, they didn't see a support engineer. They saw the spine. They saw what they'd nearly lost to ego and arrogance. They saw the architect. And no one, was asking me to leave. He didn't demand a seat at the table. He built the table.